it's great that you're here. There's more coverage lately, like in the last few weeks and months, but there should be an awful lot more, in my opinion.
As the President has said, like she's made the point that progress is not always fast enough, but we must keep reforming going forward. Barry, Billy, I want to ask you, Barry mentioned how Ursula von der Leyen was in Dublin recently. She addressed the two houses of the Dublin Parliament, and she spoke with the Taoiseach about, of course, the war in Ukraine, the impact on the cost and security of supply of energy, the outlook for the EU generally, the global economy. And in the context of Ukraine, Ms von der Leyen said, quote, "Ireland knows what it means to struggle for the right to exist. Today, another European nation is fighting for its independence." And she went on to say that Ireland is far away from the front line in Ukraine, but we understand better than most why this war matters so much to all of us. And we believe she was likening Ukraine's war with Russia to Ireland before independence from the UK, which upset some Conservative MPs, but nonetheless. I want to get your thoughts on a comment made by a TD, Richard Boyd Barrett, who got the chance to say directly to Ursula von der Leyen he believes that years of EU imposed austerity along with what he calls the failure of successive Irish governments over the years are to blame for the current housing crisis. Does he have a point?
No, he doesn't. Certainly, I mean, Richard Boyd Barrett and his political groupings are visceral in their opposition to the European Union. They don't like the concept of the European Union. They have consistently opposed the European Union. In fact, they also supported Brexit, by the way. So, I mean, that is the view and the context you have to look at it when Richard Boyd Barrett and others from that political persuasion speak. They are very, very insular in their approach and how they look at things. Ireland has been dramatically successful. And the reason we have a housing challenge and a housing problem in Ireland is because of the fact that, you know, we have now an increasing population in Ireland. We've 5 million people residing in the Republic of Ireland. When we joined the European Union, it was about 3 million. So the population has increased dramatically. We have a very successful economy. You know, you've investment coming in, you have people from outside coming into the country as well. There's a huge increase in demand for housing, and that is because of the dynamics of the economy. Clearly, there has been administrative failures and policy failures and failures of governments over a period of time in terms of the housing crisis and how it's been managed to the point where we don't have enough houses for people. But that's certainly, and you cannot blame the European Union for that. That is and must be accepted and shouldered by Ireland itself. But of course, the financial crisis was a challenge for Ireland, and the European Union at the time, you know, enforced very difficult measures on Ireland in terms of honouring debt, etc. But beyond that, and any stretch of the imagination and assessment would show that the European Union has been very positive, and the failures in terms of the housing policy are issues that Irish governments must accept themselves. So Richard Boyd Barrett blaming the European Union doesn't wash with me. He also went further, and others went further and said that, you know, the European Union wasn't a peace process. By any stretch of the imagination, that's why we have a European Union. It came out of the ashes of the Second World War, and it has evolved and continually evolves. But in the meantime, the standards of living across Europe are the highest in the world for citizens, and that's as a direct result of the European Union and how it manages its shares and pools its resources.
Barry, I want to ask you about this major corruption scandal that seems to be plaguing the European Parliament at the moment, and it relates to Belgian investigators who they have charged 4 people, including a Vice President of the European Parliament, with quote, criminal organisation, corruption, bribery and money laundering. Now, according to reports, it's by a Gulf state, reportedly Qatar. And, you know, today the European Parliament voted overwhelmingly to remove a Greek MEP for her role as VP of the Parliament. We heard as well from the European Parliament President Roberta Metsola saying, quote, there will be no impunity, there will be no sweeping anything under the carpet. You know how important this institution is. Do you think the credibility of the EU is at stake?
Well, I think the credibility of the Parliament is at stake. And I think we would be wrong to underestimate the potential damage that could be done to the reputation of the Parliament, which is at the heart of European democracy. So the stakes are pretty high. There's no question, no doubt about that. We don't know the full parameters of this scandal. The Belgian prosecutors are releasing information from day to day, and so we really can't decide exactly how to respond to it at this point. But the positive thing is that the Belgian prosecutors have found out this conspiracy and they've identified culprits so far. They've gathered very compelling evidence, very obviously, and there will be prosecutions. It would appear to me to be inevitable that that will happen. And so that's in the criminal domain. We also have to do a very serious reform around access to the European Parliament, access to MEPs, the role of foreign authorities in lobbying members of the European Parliament, and all of the transparency that's required around that. But we have to also acknowledge that wouldn't have stopped this conspiracy from happening. This is a criminal enterprise based on what we know so far, and all of the ethical framework, all of the regulatory processes in the world wouldn't have stopped somebody who is prepared to accept what seems to be bags of cash from another government for their own purposes. So I think we have to get that balance right. You know, at the moment it feels like we're trying to catch a falling knife. We don't know exactly how big this is, and therefore we should, I think, wait till we see the parameters before we design the response. But it has to be robust. It has to have at the core of it restoring public trust in the institution of the European Parliament.
Billy, Barry mentioned the word transparency there. And as you know, MEPs are obliged by rules of the Parliament to report any meetings with lobbyists that are related to their positions in special roles. Now, we've seen a report in the Irish Times citing 5 Irish MEPs who, according to this information, did not disclose any meetings with lobbyists and interest groups over 3 years. And as I said, some of your colleagues have been implicated in that. And I'm sure they have their side of the story and they're not here right now to defend themselves, so I do want to make that clear. But your thoughts generally on that story, is it a cause of concern for you to hear that?
Well, look, I mean, everybody should declare what they're obliged to declare in terms of the transparency rules around lobbying, who they interact with, etc. But I think there's a bigger question here at stake, and that is, you know, as Barry said, this goes to the heart of what democracy is about. I firmly believe that MEPs should be allowed to interact and meet groups, meet people. For example, we had people representing Iranian protesters here today. We have people from Palestine this evening who are interacting with MEPs because there's a debate in Palestine. You know, farming organisations come to Brussels, business groups come to Brussels, NGO groups come to Brussels, and they meet. But what you just need to do is declare that you met them. And that's the greatest obligation. But again, I mean, if you have a person who is inherently corrupt and wants to get around all these rules, you know, it is still very difficult to target and have measures in place that will stop a person who's intent on accepting bribes. But what you have to have is robust guidelines, rules in place, and in the event of there being any breach, that there is a crushing sanction brought to bear on people that fall foul of the rules. But in this case, clearly there's a criminal investigation ongoing as well, and we have to ensure that the Parliament, all its IT systems, all the debates, that any evidence that will be required will be furnished to the prosecuting and investigating authorities, and that there's full cooperation. But longer term, we've a lot of work to do to ensure that you know, people don't view this Parliament in a way that it doesn't deserve to be viewed, because it is basically the essence of democracy in Europe.
Just 2 more questions before I let you go. First to you, Barry. The World Cup, which is ongoing at the moment in Qatar, the FIFA World Cup. You said that, quote, "While I will not be watching this World Cup, the Qatar tournament was built on the kinds of human rights abuses that I've spent much of my time in the European Parliament trying to tackle." We've heard about how Qatar is becoming a very important partner for energy within the EU. And do you think that there's pressure on the EU to maintain good ties with Qatar? Because it seems that the country is poised to become a big energy supplier to Europe, and Europe as a whole is headed towards a winter of energy shortages, it seems, because of this Russian invasion of Ukraine. Do you think there is pressure there, despite concerns with their human and labour rights?
I mean, look, the corruption of this Parliament, allegedly by the government of Qatar, requires to be investigated to its fullest extent. I think if we try to deal with the energy security issue at the same time, we'll do ourselves a very grave disservice. We are engaged in an enormous challenge on the continent of Europe with Ukraine and Russia after the Russian invasion. And we have to fight that fight. And that includes casting around to ensure that people get through this winter with the greatest comfort possible. The Qatar World Cup, yeah, I made my decision not to watch it. It has been painful for somebody who loves football, and I recommend it to people that if they had to watch it, they should make a contribution to a human rights NGO, like a carbon offset, a human rights offset almost. And I think, you know, it's only a minor thing to do, but the energy security issue, I don't think you can conflate the two issues, frankly. I think if we started to do human rights due diligence on the sources of LNG, of oil, of gas around the world, before we've developed fully the renewable sources of energy that we need, it would be it would be impossible for the European Union to survive in those circumstances. So unfortunately, it's not perfect, but we are heading in a direction of renewables on the energy side and of fighting for democracy as far as Ukraine is concerned. We don't have to conflate the two issues, in my opinion.
And finally, Billy, to you, back home we're expecting a government reshuffle soon, and Mr. Martin's time as Taoiseach is coming to a close, and he has faced many domestic and international challenges during his tenure as Taoiseach. And he said recently that he wants to retain housing and health and intends on leading Fianna Fáil into next general election. Do you think history will look favourably on his time as Taoiseach, and do you fully support getting behind him going into the next general election?
Well, I think history will be very kind in adjudicating his achievements so far, because, as you say, he said he's intending on leading the party into the next general election. It was a very trying and difficult time. It was effectively a tenure that was dominated by COVID. I think he handled that exceptionally well. He brought the people with him. There was a huge national collective effort that required leadership. It also required sacrifice by citizens across the country, and it did impact on people, both in terms of loss of life, families losing loved ones, diminishing people's freedoms to be able to move around, and just basic sacrifices to get through the whole epidemic. But it was led from the front by Micheál Martin, and I think he's done an exceptionally good job in that area. He's also very much a politician of consensus. He likes to bring people with him. He's not a divisive person. So in many of the roles that are required in the time ahead, I believe that particular aspect and attribute that he has will be very important. I reference particularly Northern Ireland, broader discussions around the challenges facing Northern Ireland in terms of political stability, getting the institutions up and running, the protocol, and then ensuring that Ireland has a significant role to play internationally and within the European Union as well. And I think for all those reasons, his tenure is and will be adjudicated as very successful.
Billy, Barry, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.